So the question is, why do I ride? Why do I have a passion for motorcycles? Why I'm into motorcycling? Well, I guess you got to go back several years, maybe about 60 years. And the fact that I'm the youngest of 3 brothers. My earliest memories with 2 or 3 wheelers are probably around 4 years old, maybe 1962, 63. I remember my first trike. I remember my older brothers with their 2-wheelers and how they loved to take a playing card and pin it to a frame of their bicycle with a clothespin so that when they rode, the bicycle sounded a lot like a motorcycle. So I was always enamored with my brothers on their bicycles and me on my trike. And I always looked for ways to customize my trike. I have a very clear memory of taking a tool out of my dad's shed. That tool was a pair of wire cutters. And I had this strange idea that if I could clip just about a ½ inch out of every spoke on my rear wheels, that it would really look cool. I snapped out that first spoke, and by the time I got to about the 4th one, the wheel collapsed off the trike. Well, those are the silly things that got me hooked on trikes, bicycles, and the like. My first 2-wheeler, I can remember it clearly as well. Being the little guy in the bunch and wanting to ride with all the bigger guys, I had to sit on the handlebars of my own bicycle while an older kid in the neighborhood pedaled. My foot got caught in the front spokes. The bike immediately stopped, did a quick, I guess what the younger guys today call stoppies. That bike stood up on its front wheel and went all the way over. I ended up with big gashes in my forehead, the first stitches of my life. The first of many, as it turned out. But I still love that bike. That next bicycle, I can remember going down to the Schwinn bicycle shop with my folks. And I just had to have this banana seat style bike. It was called a Schwinn Stingray. It had a 3-speed shifter just like a car mounted to the frame on between the seat and the handlebars. The handlebars, again, high-rise just like a chopper. I had to have that bike. I loved that thing. But it was a precursor to something with a motor on it. I can remember my middle brother, William. He had a Honda 175. It was a CL 175. I remember learning to ride on that thing, a full-size bike. I remember that being the first motorcycle I climbed onto and learned to operate a clutch and a throttle. You think you're doing a great thing when you kick it into 2nd gear and you got the speed up and you're riding on grass and dirt and you're going too quick, and you know that you've got to slow that thing down. And all I know how to do is grab a handful of front brake, and again, you guessed it, locked up the front tire, the bike slid over, and that was my first crash. But I still loved it. I had to get right back on. I remember trying to get my first motorcycle or motorized 2-wheeler. You know, there was a magazine called Boy's Life, and in the back there were all these advertisements for pocket knives, all kinds of activities, board games, no video games back then obviously, but board games, and then a little section where you could spend $2 or $3 and they would mail you plans to build your own mini bike. Well, I was enamored with that. I convinced my dad to let me order those plans, and my dad being a steel fabricator, we started filling pipe up with sand and putting the torch to it, heating it and bending it, trying to develop that frame. And we got the frame built to a certain level, and Dad, he worked 2 jobs all of his life. From morning to night, he was too tired to help me finish that mini bike, and finally he just said, "Son, let's get in the car." We drove down to the Honda dealer, and we picked out a cool little red SL70. I was thrilled to death. We picked out a helmet. I remember it very clearly. This was in the early 70s. That helmet had a lot of sparkles. It was a 3/4 helmet, had a big peace sign on the helmet. You know, this was early 70s. Vietnam War was still on. Peace signs and hippies and long hair was all the rage. And so I had to have a helmet with a peace sign on it. Well, I took that Honda home and I rode that bike every chance I got. Every day after school, every Saturday from sun up to sundown. My folks never knew where I was till I rolled in with a big dirty face at the end of the day. I wore that bike out on every dirt track I could find. I loved it. There was a feeling that I just couldn't get any other way. Well, as I got a little bit older, my older brother, Harry, he went through a few different bikes, and I was 14 years old and I got my first job pumping gas at a little gas station. And my brother Harry, he had and I'm not sure where he got it or how he bought it, but it was a BSA 650. This thing had to be late 60s model. What I remember most about that bike was how hard it was to start and the fact that it had the shifter on the right side. Boy, I struggled to learn to ride that thing, but I got away with it. That was the first time I ever rode a bike on paved streets. Boy, I loved riding. What a thrill it was to ride that thing. Not to mention it was a big displacement motorcycle, but the fact that I was 2 years away from having a driver's license and I still could take it down the highway, taking the risk of being caught by the police, but I loved riding. And I had the bug. There was no way I was going to get rid of that riding bug at that point. Well, a couple years later, after that, wore that Honda 70 out, I stumbled into a little bike shop close to our neighborhood, and a fella had a dealership for Hodaka. I'm sure hook or crook, I convinced my parents that I needed a 125cc Hodaka. Well, you're right, I was spoiled as a kid, but I loved riding that thing. I rode it again from daylight to dark. Wore it out. I took a hacksaw to the rear fender, took all the lights off. I just had to make it a motocross version. But again, I rode that thing through races, all kinds of amateur motorcycle races. Again, I just wore that motorcycle out. The passion was still there, very strong. Well, after that bike, you know, I got my regular driver's license, and then I got interested in hot rods and cars and all the things I needed to be able to be out on my own on the road and meet girls and do the things I wanted to do with my buddies. And so motorcycles kind of took a back seat at that point. Finished high school, went off to college, spent a year and a half, and got married in the middle of my sophomore year. Went back to college, and then I just needed transportation. Well, I found an early 70s Honda SL 350, and I rode that thing back and to school, rain or shine, snow, whatever the situation is. And I didn't ride it necessarily because I loved it so much, because I had to ride it. I needed the transportation to and from school and to and from work. I love that bike. I don't remember how I ended up selling it or got rid of it. Well, graduated from college, and you know, life happens. Children come. And 27 years later, I'm spending my Saturdays walking into the local Harley dealership. Every Saturday I spent hours in and out of those dealerships looking at every motorcycle, learning the types of bikes they were, trying to look like I was comfortable in and around a Harley dealership. I had no clue one type of Harley from the next, but I just knew the name and I knew that I wanted one. 2006, 2007, I bought my first Harley, a 2007 Road King Special. I've never looked back since. 2 more Harleys later, I'm riding the Black Pearl here and riding the Bumblebee, the 2013 Street Glide. Well, the passion is still there. Now I'm trying to stay healthy to ride as long as I can. I've done a couple of stints overseas working and had a little Suzuki in China and bought a little Royal Enfield while I was in India. Spent a few years in each of those locations and really enjoyed learning to ride those bikes and learning the country, learning to ride somewhere other than the States.
Like I got a friend behind me too here.
The passion just continued to grow, and that's why I ride. Well, I could go back and say I ride because the freedom, the wind in your face, the smell of the roadkill, those are all cliches. But I would have to say that being around older brothers who introduced me to motorcycles gave me that passion, and I've never been able to shake it since. And now I just love to get out and ride in these mountains around where I live. Now I'm fortunate to be living here in Utah, where I've got a tremendous number of rides, beautiful roads throughout the mountains, all within 100 miles of where I live. But I've been very fortunate, and I'm healthy, and I still love to ride, and I hope I can continue to ride for many more years to come. But that's why I have a passion for motorcycle. That's why I ride. So down in the comments, share your thoughts. Tell me why you ride. So please subscribe to our channel. We call it Get On The Road with Clem and Roxy. Y'all come go with us.